The air in the house was always thick with unspoken words, but on the evening of her 17th birthday, it became suffocating. Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, a single unlit cupcake with a forlorn candle sitting before her. She had bought it for herself on the way home from her part-time job at the diner, a small act of defiance against the oppressive silence that had become her life. Her Uncle Thomas sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. The front door slammed, rattling the cheap cutlery in the drawer. Margaret entered, her face a familiar mask of pinched disapproval. She was Thomas's wife, Sarah's aunt, and the woman who had taken her in after her parents died in a car crash when she was just a child. But taken in was a sterile term for the cold, resentful lodging she provided. Margaret's eyes, small and hard like pebbles, landed on the cupcake. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the quiet. "It's my birthday," Sarah said softly, not looking up. "A birthday?" Margaret scoffed, dropping her purse on the counter with a thud. "Another year of you being a burden on this family. Do you have any idea how much it costs to feed and clothe you? Money Thomas and I should be saving for our own future, not wasting on an orphan who can't seem to contribute anything." The word stung, as it always did. Burden. It was the label Margaret had stitched onto Sarah's very identity. She worked 40 hours a week, her wages going directly into a household fund she never saw. She cooked, she cleaned, she made herself as small and invisible as possible, but it was never enough. "I work, Margaret," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I give you all my pay." "A pittance," Margaret spat. "It barely covers the space you take up. We've done our duty. We've sheltered you, fed you. But you're 17 now, practically an adult. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." Sarah finally looked up, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She glanced at Thomas, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to intervene. He met her gaze for a fleeting second, his own eyes filled with a familiar, helpless sorrow, before looking away again. That was his role in this suffocating play, the silent, defeated bystander. His silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than Margaret's cruelty. "What are you saying?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. The dread was a cold tide, rising fast. Margaret walked to the hall closet and pulled out a black trash bag. She threw it at Sarah's feet. "I'm saying you're out. Pack whatever you can fit in this. I want you gone in an hour." Tears burned Sarah's eyes, hot and shameful. "Where am I supposed to go? I have nowhere." "That is not my problem," Margaret said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You're a clever girl. You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Frankly, I've stopped caring what happens to you. You were a mistake we were saddled with, and now we are correcting it. You are a burden, and we are finally unburdening ourselves." The cruelty of the words was breathtaking. Sarah looked from Margaret's cold, triumphant face to Thomas's bowed head. There was no help for her here. There never had been. The love she craved, the safety she had lost with her parents, was a ghost that had long since fled this house. With numb fingers, she stood up, the cupcake forgotten. She didn't cry, not yet. She refused to give Margaret the satisfaction. She picked up the trash bag, the crinkling plastic sounding like the shattering of her last hope. As she walked toward her small room, Margaret's final words followed her down the hall. "And don't even think about coming back." Sarah's room was more of a closet than a bedroom, a small airless space at the back of the house. It held little of personal value, a few worn-out clothes, a handful of paperback books, and a small, faded photograph of her parents she kept hidden in a shoebox under her bed. That was the first thing she reached for. Their smiling faces, captured on a sunny day long ago, were a painful reminder of a life filled with warmth and laughter, a life stolen from her. She carefully placed the photo inside her worn jacket, the one thing she wouldn't cram into the demeaning black bag. She moved with a strange, robotic calm, her mind numb to the full scope of the catastrophe. She stuffed clothes into the bag, not caring if they wrinkled. What did it matter? Where would she wear them? Her school uniform, the books she needed for her final year, her meager toiletries, everything was swallowed by the plastic sack. Every object was a memory, a tie to a life that was being systematically erased. The finality of it was absolute. There were no arguments left to be made, no pleas that could soften Margaret's granite heart. 45 minutes later, Sarah stood by the front door. The trash bag, heavy and awkward, was slung over her shoulder. Margaret was in the living room, watching television as if nothing had happened, the tinny sound of a game show host's voice filling the void. Thomas was still in the kitchen, his back to her. He hadn't moved. As Sarah's hand touched the doorknob, His voice, raspy and low, finally broke the silence. "Sarah." She stopped, her back still to him, her hand frozen on the cold metal. Hope, a stubborn and foolish weed, pushed through the cracks of her despair. Maybe he would stand up for her. Maybe at this final moment, he would be the father figure she had so desperately needed. There's a shelter on Elm Street, St. Jude's," he mumbled, his voice thick with shame. They might have a bed. And that was it. Not an apology, not a protest, just a suggestion for where she could store herself now that she was no longer his problem. The weed of hope withered and died. Sarah didn't answer. She simply turned the knob, opened the door, and stepped out into the chilly night air. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. The street was dark and empty. The suburban silence that had once felt peaceful now seemed menacing. Each darkened window of the neighboring houses felt like a judging eye. She was 17, with a trash bag full of her life and $74 in her pocket from the tips she had hidden from Margaret. The weight of her new reality finally crashed down on her, and the tears she had held back began to fall, hot and silent. She walked without a destination, the bag bumping against her leg, the plastic a constant, rustling reminder of her dispossession. She didn't go to the shelter. Pride, or perhaps just the inability to face the pity of strangers, kept her away. Instead, she walked for hours, ending up at the 24-hour bus station downtown. The air was stale with the smell of disinfectant and exhaust fumes. It was a place for people in transit, a limbo for those caught between a place they'd left and one they hadn't yet reached. It felt appropriate. She found a hard plastic chair in a corner, pulling the trash bag close to her feet. She clutched the worn jacket around her, the photograph inside a small, hard square against her ribs. She didn't sleep. She watched the comings and goings of strangers, her mind a blank canvas of shock and fear. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy windows, a single, steely thought began to form. She had survived the night. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She would not let this be the end of her story. She would survive this too. The next few days blurred into a grueling test of endurance. Sarah learned quickly that the city was indifferent to a lone teenager with a trash bag. The bus station, a temporary refuge, soon became untenable as the security guards started giving her suspicious looks. She knew she couldn't stay there forever. Her $74 was a lifeline she had to manage with desperate precision. She ate the cheapest food she could find, dollar store bread and peanut butter, and rationed every bite. At night, she found a secluded alcove behind the public library, a spot hidden from the main street, and tried to sleep, her body aching from the cold, hard concrete. Sleep was a luxury, always shallow and interrupted by the sounds of the city and the constant, gnawing fear. She washed up in public restrooms, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, to not look like what she had become, homeless. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than the bag she carried. During the day, she would go to the library, not just for the warmth, but for the escape. She lost herself in books, finding solace in worlds far from her own. It was there, surrounded by the quiet hum of learning, that she began to formulate a plan. She couldn't go back to her old school. It was too far, and she had no way to explain her situation. But her education had always been her private rebellion, her secret promise to herself that she would build a different life. She refused to let Margaret take that from her, too. Her first priority, however, was an income. Her old job at the diner was out of the question. It was in her former neighborhood, a place she couldn't bear to revisit. Armed with a mix of desperation and determination, she began walking from one cafe to another, one greasy spoon to the next, asking if they were hiring. The rejections were relentless. Some dismissed her with a wave of the hand, others looked her up and down, their eyes lingering on her worn clothes and the ever-present trash bag she tried to hide. It was on the third day, as her hope was beginning to fray, that she walked into a small, family-run restaurant called The Corner Booth. It was cozy and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. An older woman with kind eyes and a flour-dusted apron was wiping down the counter. Her name tag read, Maria. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you hiring?" Maria paused, giving her a long, appraising look. It wasn't the dismissive glance Sarah had grown accustomed to. It was searching, empathetic. "Do you have experience?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders. "I worked as a server and a dishwasher at a diner for over a year. I'm a hard worker. I'll do anything. Wash dishes, bus tables, prep food, clean the floors, anything." Perhaps it was the raw hunger in Sarah's voice, the undisguised desperation in her eyes, but Maria seemed to see past her disheveled appearance. She saw the fierce will underneath, My dishwasher quit this morning without notice, Maria said slowly. The pay isn't great and the hours are long. You start at 6 a.m. I'll take it, Sarah said, relief washing over her so intensely she felt lightheaded. Maria nodded. Okay, kid, you can start tomorrow, but you need a place to clean up. And you can't bring that bag to work. She pointed to the trash bag. Sarah's face fell. I'm figuring that out. Maria sighed, a deep, weary sound. She disappeared into the back for a moment and returned with a key. There's a small staff locker in the back. You can keep your things there for now. And there's a shower. Be here at 5:45 a.m. sharp. Don't make me regret this. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. But these were not the tears of despair she had shed before. They were tears of gratitude. I won't, she promised, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. Maria just gave her a small, sad smile. Everyone needs a chance, kid. Now go. Get some rest. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah slept with a flicker of security. It wasn't a home, but it was a job. It was a locker. It was a chance. True to her word, Sarah arrived in the back alley of the corner booth at 5:45 a.m. The lone light above the kitchen door was a beacon in the pre-dawn gloom. Maria unlocked the door, her expression tired but welcoming, and pointed Sarah toward the staff facilities. The hot water of the shower felt like a baptism, washing away not just the grime of the streets, but a layer of her deep-seated fear and shame. Dressed in a spare restaurant t-shirt and apron that smelled faintly of bleach and bacon grease, she felt a flicker of renewed identity. She was no longer just a ghost haunting the city. She was a worker. The work was everything she had been warned about. Grueling, relentless, and messy. A mountain of dirty dishes seemed to regenerate itself endlessly. Greasy pans were caked with burnt food that required furious scrubbing. Her hands, unaccustomed to the constant immersion in hot water and harsh soap, were tender and raw by noon. Her back ached with a deep, unfamiliar pain from standing for hours on the hard tile. But Sarah didn't complain. She worked with a silent, ferocious energy that did not go unnoticed. Sal, the gruff, heavily tattooed cook, barely acknowledged her at first, communicating only in grunts. But by the end of the day, after watching her anticipate the need for a clean pan and have it ready before he even asked, he silently placed a plate with a grilled cheese sandwich on her dish station. It was a simple gesture, but to Sarah it felt like an olive branch. She earned her place through sheer, undeniable effort. The kitchen, with its chaotic symphony of clattering plates, sizzling oil, and shouted orders, became her sanctuary. It was a place where the only thing that mattered was how hard you worked. After her first week, Maria handed her a plain white envelope. Inside was her pay in cash. Sarah counted it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. It was more money than she had ever held in her life. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like independence, like a future. You're a good worker, Sarah, Maria said, her tone matter-of-fact. You can keep using the locker for your things, but you need to find a place to sleep. A real place. It's not safe for a girl your age on the streets. Maria's words solidified Sarah's resolve. She had been saving every single dollar, eating staff meals at the restaurant, and denying herself any comfort. With her second week's pay clutched in her hand, she had enough for a deposit. She followed a listing in a local paper to a boarding house a few miles away, run by a stern-faced but fair landlady named Mrs. Gable. The room was tiny, with a single lumpy bed, a small desk, and a window that overlooked a brick wall. It was barely bigger than the closet she'd occupied at Thomas and Margaret's house, but it felt like a palace. It was hers. The first night she spent there, she turned the key in the lock, the sound echoing the click of the door closing behind her weeks ago. But this time it was a sound of safety, not banishment. She sat on her own bed, in her own room, and wept. Not tears of sorrow, but of profound, bone-deep relief. With a roof over her head and a steady job, Sarah's ambition resurfaced, sharp and insistent. She had to finish school. She went to the local high school, but the secretary behind the counter seemed to look right through her. I need a guardian's signature on these forms, the woman said, her voice flat and bored. And we'll need official transcripts sent from your previous school. Each word was a brick in a wall she couldn't climb. Dejected, she mentioned her struggle to Maria one slow afternoon. I have to finish school, she said, her voice tight with frustration. It's the only way I can ever be more than a dishwasher. Maria listened patiently, polishing a coffee pot until it gleamed. The world is a hard place, Sarah, she said softly. But there's more than one path up the mountain. School isn't just one building. She told Sarah about a program that helped people get their GED, their high school equivalency diploma. It offered night classes, specifically designed for people who worked. It was a lifeline. That very evening, Sarah enrolled. Her days became a relentless marathon. She would wake before dawn, work a punishing 10-hour shift, and then take a bus to her GED class, where she'd study with other tired but determined faces. She'd get home late, her body screaming with fatigue, with just enough time to sleep before it all started again. There were days she'd nearly fall asleep on the bus, her head resting against the cold window. But the memory of Margaret's voice calling her a burden was a powerful fuel. Every math problem she solved, every historical fact she memorized, was an act of defiance. It was a declaration that she was worthy, that her life had value. She was slowly, painfully, but surely, rebuilding herself from the ashes. A year spun by, measured in the rhythm of early mornings and late nights, in stacks of clean dishes and chapters of textbooks. The timid, terrified girl who had walked out into the night with a trash bag was gone, replaced by a quiet but resilient young woman. Sarah was no longer just the dishwasher. Maria, seeing her quick mind and gentle demeanor with the few customers she interacted with, had cautiously tried her out as a server during slow hours. Sarah had blossomed. She was attentive, efficient, and had a knack for remembering the regulars' orders. Her smile, once a rare and fragile thing, became more frequent. The tips she earned were a revelation, allowing her to not just survive, but to save. Her greatest triumph, however, came in the form of a thick envelope from the State Education Board. She had passed her GED exam, with scores high enough to qualify for a scholarship at the local community college. She held the certificate in her hands in the quiet of her small room, tracing her name printed in neat, official letters. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a testament to her will. It was proof that Margaret's verdict on her life was not the final one. She had not only stood on her own 2 feet, she was learning to run. She started dreaming again, timidly at first. She scanned the community college course catalog, her finger hovering over subjects like business management and literature. The idea of a future, a real career, was a small flame she carefully nurtured. Her life had found a stable, if demanding, routine. Work, study, sleep, repeat. The faces at the corner booth, Maria's maternal watchfulness, Sal's begrudging respect that had warmed into a gruff friendship, had become her surrogate family. She hadn't heard a word from Thomas or Margaret, and she was grateful for the silence. They belonged to a different life, a painful memory she was slowly leaving behind. The past, however, had a way of showing up unannounced. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It was addressed to Sarah Jenkins, care of the corner booth. Mail for her was unheard of. Maria handed it to her, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "Looks important," she noted. Sarah stared at the envelope. The return address was a law firm. Blackwood, Sterling, and Finch. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her stomach. Law firms meant trouble. Her first thought was of her aunt and uncle. Were they trying to cause problems for her? Claim she owed them something? Her hands trembled as she slowly tore it open. The paper inside was thick and formal. It was not a lawsuit, but a summons of a different kind. "Dear Ms. Jenkins, this letter is to inform you of the passing of Mr. Alastair Cromwell. We are the legal representatives of his estate. You have been named in Mr. Cromwell's final will and testament. Your presence is formally requested for the reading of the will, which will take place at our offices on Friday, October 24th, at 10 a.m. Sarah read the letter twice, then a third time. The words seemed to swim before her eyes. Alastair Cromwell. The name was vaguely familiar, a distant echo from her early childhood. He was her grandmother's brother, her great-uncle, a wealthy, eccentric recluse, according to the few stories her mother had told her. Sarah had met him only once, at a family gathering when she was 5 or 6. She remembered a tall, imposing man with kind eyes who had given her a silver dollar and told her to always bet on herself. She hadn't seen or heard from him since. Why would he name her in his will? He barely knew her. A dozen scenarios played out in her mind. Perhaps he'd left her a small token, like that silver dollar long ago. It had to be a mistake. She looked at the address of the law firm. It was in the wealthiest part of downtown, a world of glass towers and expensive suits, a world away from her tiny room and the smell of bacon grease that clung to her clothes. Apprehension and a bewildering curiosity warred within her. Something was happening, something she couldn't possibly understand. Her quiet, predictable life was about to be broken open. On Friday morning, Sarah woke up with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She chose her best clothes, a simple, clean pair of black pants and a modest blouse she'd bought from a secondhand store. Staring at her reflection, she still saw the dishwasher from the corner booth, not someone who belonged in a high-rise law firm. She asked Maria for the morning off, showing her the letter. Maria looked at it, then at Sarah's worried face. "Go," she said, squeezing Sarah's shoulder. "Whatever it is, you're strong enough to handle it. Remember that." The offices of Blackwood, Sterling, and Finch were on the 40th floor of a gleaming glass tower. The lobby was a cavern of marble and polished steel, and the silence was broken only by the soft chime of an elevator. Sarah felt utterly out of place, her heart pounding with every step. When she gave her name to the receptionist, the woman's polite smile didn't quite hide her surprise. She was led to a large conference room, with a polished mahogany table and a breathtaking view of the city. 2 people were already seated. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was Thomas and Margaret. They looked older, more worn than she remembered. Margaret was dressed in what was clearly her best suit, her face a mask of greedy anticipation. Thomas looked just as he always had, defeated and passive. Their eyes widened when they saw her, and Margaret's expression curdled into a sneer of pure contempt. "What is she doing here?" Margaret hissed, looking at the junior associate who had shown Sarah in. "This is a private family matter." Before the young man could stammer a reply, a distinguished gray-haired gentleman entered the room. "Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming. I am Mr. Sterling." He gestured for Sarah to sit, pointedly ignoring Margaret's outburst. Sarah took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from her aunt and uncle as possible. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and opened a leather-bound folder. "We are gathered for the reading of the final will and testament of Mr. Alistair Cromwell. I will be brief." He began reading through legal jargon, his voice a calm monotone. He detailed a few minor bequests to charities and old household staff. Margaret fidgeted impatiently, her eyes darting around the room as if sizing up the furniture. Then Mr. Sterling paused, looking over his glasses first at Thomas and Margaret, and then holding Sarah's gaze. "Regarding the main body of my estate," he read, quoting the will, "I have spent my last years reflecting on my life and my family. I estranged myself from my dear niece, Sarah's mother, over a foolish, prideful argument, a regret I have carried to my grave. I was not there for her, and thus I was not there for her daughter in her time of need. I have learned, however, that my great-niece was left in the care of her uncle, Thomas Jenkins, and his wife, Margaret." Margaret sat up straighter, a smug smile touching her lips. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice steady. "I also learned, through means I have made available to my executor, that on her 17th birthday, this young girl was thrown out of her home, called a burden, and left to fend for herself. I have learned of her struggle, her resilience, and her refusal to be broken. She has proven herself to be possessed of the Cromwell spirit, a spirit of independence and fortitude that I thought was lost." The smug smile on Margaret's face vanished, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror. Thomas sank lower in his chair, his face ashen. Mr. Sterling looked directly at Sarah, his formal demeanor softening for a fraction of a second. He then read the final decisive sentence. "Therefore, it is with a clear mind and a full heart that I, Alistair Cromwell, do hereby name my great-niece, Sarah Jenkins, as the sole heir to my entire remaining estate, including all properties, stocks, and liquid assets, valued at approximately $20 million. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where sound ceased to exist. Sarah simply stared, her mind unable to process the number. $20 million. It was an abstract concept, a string of words with no connection to reality. Margaret was the first to break. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. "What? No, that's impossible. There's been a mistake." She shot to her feet, her voice rising to a screech. "She's a nobody, a burden. We took her in. We fed her. She owes us. That money is ours." Mr. Sterling remained perfectly calm. "There is no mistake, madam. The will is ironclad. In fact, Mr. Cromwell was very specific." He flipped a page. He also included a provision stating that should you or your husband contest this will, a full dossier compiled by a private investigator detailing your treatment of Sarah, including financial records of the wages she earned as a minor that you misappropriated, will be turned over to the district attorney. He looked at them coldly. He also specified, and I quote, "For their failure in their duty of care and their callous disregard for family, Thomas and Margaret Jenkins shall receive nothing." Margaret's face went from red to a blotchy white. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a sputtering, impotent rage. Thomas looked like he might faint. A security guard appeared silently at the door. At Mr. Sterling's nod, he stepped forward. "This meeting is concluded," Mr. Sterling said. As the guard escorted the stunned and muttering couple out of the room, Margaret's final venomous glare at Sarah was filled with a lifetime of hatred. Sarah was left alone in the vast, silent room with the lawyer, the city sprawling beneath her like a map of a world she no longer knew. She felt dizzy, numb. It wasn't just the money. It was the validation. Someone had seen her. Someone had watched her struggle and had not judged her for being homeless or a dishwasher, but had admired her for being a survivor. Alistair Cromwell, a man she barely remembered, had given her back her own value. She left the law office in a daze. The city streets looked the same, but everything was different. The weight of her past, the constant struggle for survival, had been lifted. It was replaced by a new, staggering weight, the weight of a future she could have never imagined. Her first stop was not a bank or a store. She took a bus back to the corner booth. She walked in, and Maria looked up from the counter, a question in her eyes. Sarah, for the first time, couldn't find the words. She just walked behind the counter and hugged the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing. As she sobbed into her shoulder, tears not of sorrow or relief but of sheer, overwhelming disbelief, she knew that her life had been irrevocably changed. But the true inheritance she would carry forever was the strength she had found in the darkness. This story is a testament to the fact that our worth is not determined by the labels others place on us, but by the strength we find within ourselves. True wealth is not money, but the resilience to overcome and the kindness to remember where we came from. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope.